Alright guys, this is massive when it comes to the next Legend of Zelda game on the Nintendo Switch 2 and Monolith Soft, because a huge interview has been published by Monolith Soft and Nintendo, and it looks like their partnership on creating the Legend of Zelda is going to get even bigger, because some big things are planned for what's going to be happening for the next Legend of Zelda game, in addition to some details on how Monolith Soft has helped shape Zelda games in the past, because for those who don't know, Monolith Soft has helped out on The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. They've helped out on The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. They've done a lot of incredible work that has been invaluable to Nintendo, not just on The Legend of Zelda, but also on other series like Animal Crossing and Splatoon. So what's next for this partnership? But it should also be noted that Nintendo does fully own Monolith Soft as a company. So while it is a partnership together, they also are a subsidiary of Nintendo, so they have full ownership of them. But let's get into what Monolith Soft and Nintendo had to say in a recent write-up on what's going to be happening next with these companies, in addition to what happened in the past as well. So Monolith Soft Zelda interview highlights. Shout outs to Stealth for rounding up the highlights here, because this is just fascinating stuff. So Nintendo and Monolith Soft were excited / nervous working on The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword together, but it turned out well. Monolith Soft joined the Breath of the Wild project right before the first footage was released to the public. With Breath of the Wild, Monolith Soft helped with level design and gameplay ideas. Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild required an amount of work they had not experienced before. Now, the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom collaboration was even greater, with Nintendo regularly visiting Monolith Soft's studio in the early stages of development. Now, during these visits, the Nintendo people would talk with the new Monolith Soft staff. Iwamoto would like Monolith Soft to play a central role as a strong partner in creating Zelda from scratch. Now, Stealth also adds this, but I want to get back to that last point in just a bit. Monolith Soft still makes their own ambitious RPGs, and that is separate from the team that helps Nintendo with Zelda, but it's obvious how important Monolith is to Nintendo, and this interview really drives that home. So let's just go ahead and talk about this first part with The Legend of Zelda, Monolith Soft playing a central role as a strong partner in creating Zelda from scratch. Then we'll discuss what Monolith Soft is doing next, because I do think that this is a little bit twofold. So for those who don't know, Monolith Soft also has multiple teams. It's not just one team that's doing everything. They have multiple teams, and they've been on a hiring spree in the last number of years, just hiring a lot more people from when they first got on with Nintendo. I think they're around 40, 50, 60 people or so, somewhere in that range. And now they're well over 200, nearly, I think, 300 people plus at this point. So they've expanded quite a bit, and they've had multiple locations built up to kind of hire in new staff, which is one of the reasons why they talked about how they talk to new staff, because to kind of get them to say, hey, this is the Monolith Soft and Nintendo way of doing things. You might have worked at Bandai Namco or Square Enix or Koei Tecmo, and all of those places can be great, but this is how we do things here, and this is how we create the type of quality products that we do here. So I do think that's a good idea to kind of bring people in and get them thinking and get them playing on the same page overall. Now let's talk about a central role as a strong partner in creating the next Zelda from scratch. And I think that this is going to be very important, what we get from the next Legend of Zelda game. I know that I think at least the Wild era, so Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, Hyrule Warriors, Age of Calamity, Age of Imprisonment, that era, that art style, that type of game, I think it's done overall, even though those are different games and they do different things. But I do feel that they are going to move on to something drastically different, and I feel that a company like Monolith Soft, the reason why Nintendo wants to have them there from the beginning, from scratch, is so they can create something very unique and different. I think that once you have success doing something for so long, so for the past decade they've been on this Breath of the Wild style of game and art style and everything, you want to continue to just do that because it worked for you. They've had some of the most successful games overall when it comes to Legend of Zelda in this era. Between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, Age of Calamity, and Imprisonment, these games have sold millions upon millions upon millions. Some of the most successful titles in the spin-off and, of course, mainline series. Actually, the two most successful between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, pretty much almost engulfing all the rest of the series when it comes to mainline games combined. So sometimes there's a tendency to keep doing the same thing. Now, with Legend of Zelda games, and I know Mr. Aonuma, they're going to try something very different. I don't foresee that the next Legend of Zelda game will be like the previous ones that we got. And I think that having Monolith Soft from scratch there and their expertise when it comes to creating different types of landscapes and worlds and art and design and making things look different despite being a different game, that is going to be so key in seeing what they do next. The vibe of this next Legend of Zelda game, especially if Monolith Soft is on there from the beginning, from scratch, I'm guaranteeing you it's going to be very different. Now, there were talks of people saying, hey, maybe Monolith Soft should be able to create a Legend of Zelda game. And I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon, considering the type of responsibilities and what Monolith Soft has to do with their own big JRPG, which we're going to talk about in just a bit. But I do think that having Monolith Soft there from the very beginning is probably the next best thing to create something that is going to be quite different from what we got before, but still respect what we have, keeping the spirit of that. Now, I think that that's going to be very interesting to see exactly how Monolith Soft and Nintendo can come together to create something, because some people felt that Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom deviated too much from the traditional formula. Others felt that it was a very good change overall, and there was enough stuff in there from Zelda's DNA to still constitute it as a great Legend of Zelda game. I'm kind of more in that camp. I do think that, yes, there are some things, obviously, they changed that maybe some people don't like the dungeon structures and stuff like that, and the lack of them when it comes to Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, at least in terms of what we got before. But I still think that there's enough in there in terms of what makes Zelda Zelda. And of course, they tried something new, something different, and it ended up paying off for them huge when it comes down to it, considering the sales of the game. But I'm expecting, with Monolith Soft still on board, they're still going to create a really big and expansive world that has stuff to do out in the open. But I do think that they will probably kind of get back a little bit to what they did before with Ocarina of Time and what they've done before with Twilight Princess, and actually make intricate and elaborate dungeons with Monolith Soft there from the beginning. And I think that the team size, and I would say more like the horsepower as well, team size is great, but the horsepower of the Nintendo Switch 2 being able to create such bigger and better worlds and more intricate timing and have the power and I would say the efficiency to be able to run what they're going to want to do. This is probably going to be incredible what Monolith Soft and what Nintendo can do for the next Legend of Zelda game. So I'm definitely excited for that. Now, I do want to get into the last point here that Stealth made, stating that Monolith Soft has a separate team, of course, with the Takahashi Team 1 working on that next big JRPG, which Monolith Soft has already stated they're working on that. So this is separate. You don't have to worry about potential resources or time or whatever being split between that next big JRPG and an announcement of that compared to the Legend of Zelda games. But I do think that it's very important, obviously, that that next big Monolith Soft RPG is also made. Yes, it'll probably sell nowhere near as much as Legend of Zelda, but that's not the point. The point is to have variety. The point is to have a long and deep catalog of games. And Monolith Soft has always been, when it comes to Nintendo, one of the developers that can really show off the true strength of a system, especially a new system. If you look at things, Monolith Soft has been at the forefront of the Wii U and the Nintendo Switch 1, showing off games early to show that, hey, this system can do some pretty impressive things. Now, I think with the Nintendo Switch 2, it really isn't as important because we've seen other third-party developers and Nintendo show some pretty impressive stuff, especially with the third-party ports. I think that's the biggest thing that Monolith Soft had to kind of fill the gap to show that you can do that on the Wii U, because there wasn't a lot of third-party games in terms of expansive, big JRPGs. Same thing goes for the Nintendo Switch 1. There wasn't really a lot of big, expansive JRPGs on the Nintendo Switch 1. So, of course, Monolith Soft was right there to fill in at the very beginning of the life between Xenoblade Chronicles X on the Wii U and Xenoblade Chronicles 2 on the Nintendo Switch 1. But with the Switch 2, we already see kind of stuff like Star Wars Outlaws and Assassin's Creed Shadows, which are pretty good conversions of massive open-ended games from Xbox and PlayStation. So, obviously, we know that the system is capable, and we've seen what it can do capability-wise already. But with Monolith Soft, with someone developing specifically and strictly for it from the ground up for the Nintendo Switch 2, that can show something a little bit different from a first-party perspective, in addition to having a massive open-ended RPG built with Nintendo's system in mind. So I do think that that is going to hit a bit different than some of the other stuff that we saw, even though that we know that the system is well capable of it. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Monolith Soft's next big JRPG in early 2026. I do think that at a Nintendo Direct or something, they could show it off and they can say, hey, this is the next big new JRPG that Monolith Soft is working on. I don't know how long it's going to take before we get the next Legend of Zelda reveal. When it comes to major Legend of Zelda, that was in 2023 with the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And I do think that because Tears of the Kingdom did not get DLC, they essentially just stopped working on the game and moved on very quickly. I would guess that they've already been multiple years in development when it comes to pre-production, planning, and starting things up with the next Legend of Zelda game. They were pretty much finished with Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom in 2022, but they did take about a year for optimization as well. So they pretty much finished in 2021, and then 2022 was coming up, and then they said, okay, we need to take some more time for optimization. So then they moved it to 2023 to make sure that there wasn't a lot of issues with the game. So I'm guessing they've already moved on when it comes to the next Legend of Zelda games. Zelda games are always pretty much in development overall because of how things work and the schedules and how things take time. So I do think that the next Legend of Zelda game would probably be an announcement maybe 2026 or 2027 for a release. I would think that they would want a shorter release between reveal and release of the game, but I do think it's going to be dependent on a number of factors overall. Obviously, when it comes to the fans and how the Nintendo Switch 2 is doing. If the Switch 2 is still doing gangbusters and doing incredible, I don't think they're going to be in a rush to reveal the next Legend of Zelda game. But if the Switch 2 maybe isn't doing as good and they need maybe a bit of a spark, I do think that they might want to reveal the next Legend of Zelda game a bit earlier than that. So I do think it's going to be dependent on how the Nintendo Switch 2 is doing just a bit. And obviously, it's going to more depend on when the game is available to be shown overall. But I do think that it might be dependent just a little bit, just a fraction of exactly how Switch 2 is doing, because we know that Nintendo in the past, they've decided to kind of move things up just a bit. Maybe if something isn't doing well, or maybe they need to talk to the fans about something. We saw it with Metroid Prime 4. We saw it with the next Fire Emblem game. There was like we saw it with Fire Emblem 3 Houses. Like, they want to make sure that they do things that kind of appease sometimes when it comes to what the fans are thinking. So we'll see what happens and what they do with other Legend of Zelda games as well, because we still don't have the Legend of Zelda, the Wind Waker HD. We don't have Twilight Princess HD, and people have been waiting for those games. So is that something that they can kind of put on the table and say, okay, here we go. We've got this that's coming out as well in between the next big Legend of Zelda game that Monolith Soft and that Nintendo are going to be working on. But yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how they kind of play all of this out. And I think that the major or takeaway point with all of this is that working together is definitely the best thing for the franchise going forward. I think that that is an optimal thing. I think that these two teams work together. The fact that they're doing this kind of shows and kind of giving people a bit of a tease of what's to come when it comes to Monolith Soft and Nintendo working on this next game. And I think that it's a key factor in showing that, yeah, we know that the next game, this is pretty much the hint, the drop, you know, whatever you want to call it. That the next game, oh yeah, it's in development. And not only is it in development, it is going to be incredible. I think that they have some great ideas that I wouldn't say that they were limited by Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but obviously when you're making a certain game in a world, there's certain things that you have to do within that world. Now that if you're creating something different from scratch with Monolith Soft, there's so many different things that they can do. And the fact that Nintendo has the trust in them to say that, hey, we want a stronger partnership. And they came on at the beginning of Breath of the Wild when it comes to that game, right at the beginning of that, and they worked on Skyward Sword. They were nervous to see if it would work out. But now over the course of a decade plus at this point, they have the utmost confidence in Monolith Soft to have them there from the beginning, from scratch, and create ideas and create different things to put into the game. So that's why I think that this is just super important. That whole last point saying with Iwamoto and saying that Monolith Soft will play a central role as a strong partner in creating a Legend of Zelda game from scratch, I think that that is going to pay huge dividends. And that's going to be a big thing when it comes to the next Legend of Zelda game. I wouldn't be surprised if there are more Xenoblade type of influences in terms of game mechanics or kind of what Monolith Soft has done with the next Legend of Zelda game. But once again, I do want to make sure that I repeat this because I already know in the comment section or what people think. I do think that they are going to move more towards of a traditional Zelda game with dungeons, and I think that Monolith Soft is going to be the team to really help out with getting with that, plus of course the Zelda team. But I think that the perfect fusion of the Legend of Zelda, if you look at what we got before in the past and what we got with Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, there is still a perfect fusion. And I think that the Nintendo Switch 2 system with Monolith Soft can help create that. If you have maybe not as big of a world as Tears of the Kingdom, I think that that world is massive. And there's really no need to make another Legend of Zelda game right now that's as big as Tears of the Kingdom with the sky and the depths and the ground level. You don't need to do that. Even with Breath of the Wild, with how big of a world that Hyrule is, you don't need to do that either. You can cut that in half and create a dense Hyrule overall, then create maybe 7 or 8 really dense, intricate dungeons with Monolith Soft and Nintendo working together. And I think that if you create stuff to do in the open world and cut it down, make it to where it's not as big as the previous Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and then you also have the intricate dungeon design of the previous games, that will give you a perfect meld between old Zelda and new Zelda. And I think it would make a lot of people happy. Even if you can't do 7 or 8 dungeons, maybe you do like 4 or 5 intricate big dungeons that have a key factor in terms of getting an item or getting a thing and kind of moving along like you saw in previous Zelda games, but then also create that dense open world that Breath of the Wild players love. So I think that that's what they're going to try to create with the next Legend of Zelda game, and it's going to be super cool to see what they exactly do here. But I'm expecting big changes. I'm expecting it to be very different. I'm not expecting it to be the exact same as the previous Zelda games when it comes to anything. So we'll see what they end up doing overall. But what do you guys think about this when it comes to the Legend of Zelda and Monolith Soft working together from scratch, playing a central role, and what they're working on next as well with Monolith Soft's big RPG? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other Nintendo Switch 2 RPG content and more right here on screen. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.